regarding financing of election campaigns. And his notice of motion is, whereas the provincial government's recent effort to reform local government elections did not deal with the source of election campaign funds, and whereas the appearance of a conflict of interest is created when developers and unions that make significant contributions to election campaigns of candidates for council also have matters that come before council, and that whether or not these conflicts are permitted in law, they harm the reputation of council and impair the legitimacy of its decisions. And be it resolved that while this resolution does not have the force of law, the City of North Vancouver strongly urges all candidates for election to council to abstain from accepting donations from developers with projects or potential projects before council, or from labor unions that represent employees of the city. And be it further resolved that a copy of the resolution be forwarded to the other Metro Vancouver municipalities, the UBCM, and the Provincial Ministry of Community, Sport and Cultural Development. And there's a note that this motion is not intended to discourage modest personal contributions from citizens who are employees of property development companies or individual members of unions. It is intended to discourage organizations with a direct pecuniary interest in matters before council from being significant contributors to the funding of elections to city council.
And what, Councillor Haywood?
May I make a move?
Thank you, Councillor Clark.
Sure.
Councillor Haywood.
Thank you, Worship. I scribbled the first draft of this motion last meeting when this issue came up for the 19th time, and I figured this would be a good way to address. Just because we've always done things in a certain manner, it doesn't mean we should continue to do them. And I think perhaps the long tenure of a lot of councillors has blinded them to the fact that this is something that we should probably address. Now, it's a year before the election, so this is a good time to kind of deal with this. If we deal with it now, we don't have to talk about it again. And that's my hope. I hope councillors find the motion balanced, kind of between left and right, and consider it with again, a preemptive strategy that allows us to put this matter to rest. And otherwise, it speaks for itself, and thank you to the clerk for reading it up for me.
I'm going to Councillor Bell, or Councillor Clark, you had your time. I turned you off. Did you want to speak more?
I want to speak.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Clark. No?
Thank you. Thank you, Worship. Well, first of all, this issue is very much an issue in the city of North Vancouver. Back in 1985, developer Vac Slate got 4 people elected in the 1985 election, and Park and Tilford Garden, Park and Tilford Shopping Center is a result. It was so hot for them during that election, though, that they came back with 50% of the square footage, which was to be shopping center, as a movie center, and that has been a raging success. In fact, within a year, they needed expansion space, and they didn't have it because there was a shopping center next door to them. So it's very much a city of North Vancouver issue. That was a developer Vac Slate that did that. Across the nation, Rob Ford in Toronto mayor, the whole Senate scandal, the Prime Minister's office involvement, the past 2 mayors of Montreal, politicians in general across this country are in disrepute. The guy who saws wood and bangs nails, and the cop, the fireman, the nurse, the common man, the people who Labor Day is named for, these salt of the earth types are fed up, sick and tired of their elected politicians being in the pockets of developers. And this motion, in its own way, and it's totally unenforceable, no one can sign on to it, but I'll be very interested to hear what the flavor of the debate is here. The public is demanding this of us. It's come before us many times. I've referenced contributions to candidates at this table, successful candidates, people sitting at this table, taking money from developers and then sitting here and voting supposedly with clear conscience and no infringements. It is wrong. It's simply wrong, and this motion addresses it. Thank you.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Worship. I don't necessarily think that this means that having the candidates having accepted a contribution from a developer means that they're in the pockets of the developer, and the size of the contribution, is a factor. Obviously, if contributions are under $100, you don't even have to indicate who they come from in terms of disclosure of your campaign sources. But in the end, all the contributions that a candidate receives are published, and in terms, if they're over $100, $100 or more are published. And I guess the public can make a decision as to how they feel about that. The problem is that in the process, that information isn't revealed until after the election. It's in the report that comes in from the candidates, so that it's a question of whether that information then influences how people vote the following election, which is 3 years away. So I don't think it necessarily means they're in the pockets. The problem is, it certainly can add to the appearance that such contributions may influence how candidates vote. And I know historically the issue of contributions from unions was raised when I sat on a different council, and legal opinions indicated that accepting contributions did not constitute conflict of interest or invalidate the ability of a councillor to vote on the union contracts, for example. But it's the question, I guess, increasingly, because we've seen, as Councillor Clark referenced, a string of embarrassments, I guess, of elected officials at a variety of levels of government in terms of influence, if you want to call it, or the potential appearance of influence on how they vote on different issues. So I also recognize that it's up to the individual councillor, as I understand from the legal advice that we've had in the past, to determine whether or not they feel they're in a conflict of interest. Obviously, Councillor Buchanan tonight recused herself, not because of contribution, but because of her employment, and an issue that we were dealing with, which dealt with her employer. And that's the responsibility that an individual councillor makes. And so I respect her for that. I am prepared to support this motion on the basis that I believe that it's not enforceable from the point of view, it's still up to the councillor to determine, or a council member, whether they're for mayor or councillor, to decide what they accept. I think if it's a guiding principle, and if it's something that it will help, perhaps, an indication of the desire that we want to see transparency, and that we want to clearly reinforce the image that the decisions that are being made by the council members are based on the evidence that's before them when a particular application comes forward, and that it's not influenced. So I will support the motion.
And Councillor Boyd.
Thank you, Richard. I've run successfully in the past 3 elections, and never have I sought nor accepted campaign contributions from unions or developers. In fact, 95% of the money spent on my campaigns I spent myself in order to have an opportunity to be a voice at this table. So obviously, it's not necessary to take that money in order to be successful. We as incumbents have a tremendous advantage simply because for the past 3 years, and in many cases many more years, our names have been in the local press. We have made decisions, we have records that allow voters to pretty much decide whether or not we represent their interests or not. So again, I say, certainly for those of us at this table, it's absolutely not necessary in order to accept that money to be successful. I think that there's a great deal of concern at all levels with all levels of government as to how ordinary citizens can participate in the process and not find that the outcome of elections is interfered with by people who wield a lot of influence by virtue of contributions. And while again this is not an enforceable motion, And it's really, at present, in spite of the fact that the numbers, when people are polled, have indicated that this is an area that the public wants addressed by the provincial government. One can only ask, why did the provincial government not move on campaign finance reform? Probably because at that level of government, they didn't want to give up that financial advantage that they enjoyed in their campaigns. And it's pretty hard to argue that in municipal elections there ought to be campaign contribution limits or restrictions on who can contribute, and then not follow your own, your own arguments when it comes time for your own elections. So I urge all members of council to seriously consider how necessary it is to their chance of success to accept money from these sources. It certainly has found its favor with a lot of people in our community, a lot of people who don't come out to speak to us. I suspect share those views. I will support the motion. I urge all members of council to seriously consider whether or not they want to even have that appearance of conflict, regardless of whether it is a legal conflict or not. Thank you.
Councillor Keith.
Thank you very much, Richard. Most people I know, and I've talked to, know in fact that I take contributions from both unions and developers, and they know that because I've been entirely transparent about that. And I think one can get a false analogies about Rob Ford and what's going on in the Senate. Those things are problematic because there's an attempt to hide and not be transparent. And I've never attempted to hide anything I've done. People I talk to also know that my fundraising, which has been successful, and in fact, in the political world, I pride myself as a good fundraiser, that has been done in keeping with the law. But I think people also understand that there's a bit of inside baseball about this, that this is an issue on this council, because, in part, because there are debates about the future of the city. And the implication here, of course, and it's been close to said, is that votes at this council table are for sale by campaign donations. And that, quite frankly, is incorrect. Of course, we have before us a motion that wants to spread that insult to the District of North Vancouver and accuse Mayor Walton of the same thing when we send this motion to Mayor Walton, when we send this motion to Mayor Watts, when we send this motion to Mayor Robertson, that in fact they are all, in fact, whether believe it or no, in a conflict of interest because of their activities. And I get Councilor Wilkins' point as well, because I was just recently engaged in another election campaign in which the party I supported campaigned on an end to all union and corporate donations. We worked hard for that. Yet people around this table I know supported other parties, despite that. Parties who were deeply entrenched in the idea of continuing this constitution. So I know what it's about. It doesn't mean I'm going to sign a declaration of unilateral disarmament at this level. I'll continue to conduct myself in an open and transparent way within the law. In fact, I will encourage others to do it, because while some of us may be in a position, as I am, and as Councilor Wilkins is, to use our own personal wherewithal to elect council, other people are not, and we never have the chance to get involved in politics were it not for fundraising of some kind. And in particular from union fundraising. And I know many people at various levels around this table have accepted union contributions. And I don't find that wrong. If you want the union endorsement, you accept the union contribution. I think we should be very clear about whether or not we feel that's a wrong, and if anything is wrong, please tell the people in this city what was wrong with your decision. I'm not going to support this. If there was a further resolution come forward that condemned the provincial government for its failure to, in fact, introduce legislation in this area, and for its lack of courage, I would support that. If there was another motion that came forward that encouraged the provincial government to ban all union and corporate donations and replace it with a system of public financing for election, I would support that. But that's not something that we should decide to support this.
I just make a few comments. I get it. I understand. It's not something that we struggle with only. It's other levels of government struggle with only. I receive contributions, and people think that there's some sort of return favor that's implied, and that just isn't the case. That just is. know that we have to put the full disclosure on the web, which I do, and I think the city was one of the first to actually put it on before it was required. And to have it there, and I think previous elections as well, I certainly support that. I think it should all be very clear and transparent. But I do also realize that there are some that might not have that ability to get elected. When I was first ran in 1993, I received funds from CUPE, the union, and it helped me actually pay for the election. I wouldn't have been able to do that. And so there are some challenges with the system as we're being proposed here. I can tell you that all the members, the vast majority of elected officials in Canada do so for the right reasons. I think everybody at this table does so for the right reasons. They come here because they live in the community and they want to make it a better place. Now, we may have philosophical differences about whether it's up or down or wide or how we vote on issues, and that's totally fair. But I never once believed that any member here is here because they owe something to somebody, whether they owe some sort of project or development or public amenity. I think that they're here because they want to be better for the community. And so I will not support this. I think people believe in me and they know what I'm about. I think I've been very principled and very respected. And people support that. And to run for mayor is not a cheap endeavor. Last time I ran, there was 3 others that ran against me. You have to put a campaign together. If you don't put a campaign together, there's many mayors in the region have had it. And councillors who just sit on the rolls and they don't get elected. They didn't work out. So you have to put the time in. So I believe that the provincial government has to address this. They're the ones. I would love to have support limits on donations. I would love to have that type of thing. I'd like to have better disclosure, disclosing it even as you get the dollars before the elections have been called or before the election is held. I don't have a problem with that. But this is a level that the provincial government has to deal with, and they're the ones that set the rules. And I think everyone comes to this table, every one of us, with the right intentions. It's not going to be that they can be bought by one particular group or another. I was in the mid-90s. There was a redevelopment on Marine Drive, and I received some funds from a developer along there. It came to council, and I flat out refused any of the redevelopment. There's some tall stories where Dave Buckford and Dick Irwin were going to be. They did not call me. They did not upset. They said, we like your philosophy. At the following election, we think you are a good candidate. You may not have supported our project, but we think you provide good governance for the city. And I think that's what they expect. They don't expect any favors in return. That's not what candidates go. So, we'll have to Councillor Hayward for a round.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to say, as mover, I'm not giving notice to any member of council by this. I think we're having a really good, robust debate on an issue of very important principle. And but I think the issue is, according to an old axiom that was given to me when I was a politician, that Caesar's wife must not only be virtuous, she must appear to be virtuous. And I just think that time has moved on, and we have an opportunity for leadership. We can't say and keep asking senior levels of government to do something that we won't do ourselves. That just doesn't make sense. So I don't want us to lose and let this opportunity for leadership in this area of improving governance and being transparent. Transparency is not enough. Transparency, as the mayor pointed out, was a great improvement. But a consequence of transparency has been examination. And the next step is to look at the results and say, no, that just doesn't look right. There is an appearance of a potential conflict of interest that we don't have to tolerate. And the argument about not being able to fund the campaigns, I don't doubt that every incumbent member of this council has the ability to get the funds a different way from individuals because of their long-standing reputations in the community and their networks. So it's not for them, and I don't think that developers and unions are going to go fund non-incumbent candidates to any great extent either. So the argument that it is to try and support the newcomers doesn't make sense to me as well. So I hope we take this opportunity for leadership and that it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Some questions, please.
poll vote. Councillor Bell.
Yay.
Councillor Haywood.
Yay.
Councillor Bockham.
Yay.
Councillor Buchanan.
Nay.
Councillor Keating.
Nay.
Councillor Clark.
Yay.
Mayor Masada.
Nay.
So the motion is carried 4-3.
Thank you. Next item, please.